someone's diagnosed positive for mold, but then you look at their spouse, lives in the same house, their environment is the same, except for he is like, eats Cheetos, does whatever he wants, drinks some beer, not like a pillar of health, but he's doing fine. So then you're forced to the question of, is it a problem with just this external environment, or is there something that's going on within the way that this person operates that is preventing them from being able to deal with that environment? Using the phrase treating the body as a whole has kind of become one of those ones where it's lost more value the more people start to say it. But it does actually have its roots in a good concept. It comes out of this concept of holism, right? So holism is this idea that you as a person are more than just the sum of your parts. You're more than an arm stitched onto a trunk and a leg stitched on and they plopped your head on, right? So that's kind of where that concept comes from, in the sense that we want the whole of you to be healthy, right? But when we look at the difference between things like functional medicine versus conventional medicine, this causes a lot of tension for people, because a lot of times this idea of treating the body as a whole is kind of all right, fine, relative to let me stomp whatever symptom you're feeling. Let's get rid of that. Here's something that can get rid of the thing you're feeling right now. But I think if you're actually able to hold both of those things in your mind at the same time, that's actually really useful. Because if we can say, this person in front of me is feeling poorly, there's something wrong, it's reasonable to think, okay, there's something probably happened, and then that created a problem, and now this person feels this way, right? So I'm looking at a car that's smashed up on the side of the road. I look at the tree that's got the bark knocked off from it, and I realize something happened here that took the car that was driving great, and then now you can't get it started again. So if we kind of think about it that way, this middle ground is actually a really nice place to be, because we can look at people and say, what has happened here? And that gives us place to do a deep analysis to figure out the link between what has happened here and how does that actually turn into what they're feeling, rather than saying we're just going to look scattershot at a whole human and just try to pick apart all the things that aren't optimum and then hope that if we address enough of them, then we will solve the problem, right? So one is we're kind of shooting into the wind and hoping we hit something, and the other is saying well, what thing could have happened, or what error can we find and measure that extrapolated would cause that person to feel this way. There was a time that we came home from visiting my wife's family up north. It was in the summertime. We were gone for a week, and we came back, and we noticed that there was a smell in the house. It smelled wet. So that's number one. That's the symptom, right? And so then you start to look around, go in the kitchen, and I realize the floor is wet. So our wood floor is wet. And then so further examination, dishwasher has malfunctioned and dumped all the water through the floor, and then it went under the floorboards, and then that's why we have this smell. What does that mean? So if we think about that in a person, you wouldn't say, okay, we need to just rip all the flooring out everywhere. It's a water problem, so we should just take out all of the plumbing. We don't do any of that. We say, okay, let's put our energy, let's put our money into fixing the dishwasher. And then from there, we're going to have to solve the problem of the wet floor. So in this case, we're trying to get to, okay, we started with the smell, and that also led us to this problem that we can measure. The floor is wet, but ultimately we have to solve for the dishwasher to be able to fix it. And I think if we understand that in a person, and we say, rather than trying to fix all the things, what if we focus on the one core problem? If you find the thing that's going to have the biggest effect on the overall function of the body that's related to the symptoms, we now have a bridge between where does this symptom come from and how do we get past just trying to squish the symptom and get back to trying to let the body function fully so that that symptom doesn't have to exist anymore. We realize there's a straight line to a certain pathology. So you'll find that whether it's conventional medicine or functional medicine, there's going to be critiques of both paths, right? So people would critique conventional medicine by saying, I know I'm going to get an opportunity to solve this symptom. I don't know that I'm going to get the chance to solve the underlying problem. And there's probably going to be a medication that's going to have trade-offs in that equation, right? So that's kind of that's the criticism. We can get you something that's going to take care of the pain, but there might be other stuff that comes with that, and we might not be able to fix the thing underneath it, right? But there's a solution. There's a solution to that. On the other end, if you think about functional medicine, the criticism might be that, okay, well, we've examined kind of like the core structure things, but then we start to get into testing that starts to feel esoteric. It starts to feel like we're testing things that feel fringy, right? And the classic example of that is, looking at something like mold or Epstein-Barr or things that can obviously be problems for people. But then you'll look at a scenario like we just saw recently where someone's diagnosed positive for mold. And then so what do? The solution is then detoxify, get rid of the mold. But then you look at their spouse who is the same age, similar upbringing, lives in the same house, works out of the same house. So they're not like their environment is the same, except for he is like, doesn't have a great diet, right? Eats Cheetos, does whatever he wants, drinks some beer, isn't particularly active, not like a pillar of health, but he's doing fine. So then you're forced to the question of, is it a problem with just this external environment, or is there something that's going on within the way that this person operates that is preventing them from being able to deal with that environment? And that environment isn't specific to mold. I'm not hating on mold. Believe me, we've seen our share of people with mold, and that's definitely a thing to address. I'm not criticizing that. But what I'm saying is rather than getting so hyper-focused on, I see this panel, I want to try to solve it, we can back up into what is going on within this person that would prevent them from being able to do that given this environment. So at this point, hopefully you realize that there's actually a place in this process for both sides. On one end, you might find that using conventional medicine may be something that helps you just to get over the hump, to get past the threshold where you can start to do more things and start to get a little bit of leverage, while at the same time, you can still be addressing things in the environment, trying to do detoxification, making sure your nutrition's good, kind of like adding and removing things to your internal chemistry that help you with that, right? And then third, if you care, I would actually think about the whole problem from a whole different angle, because the way I would think about it is all of these things come back to one substrate. So it all kind of comes back to the brain in the end. The brain is what is going to control the amount of immune response that you have, the sensitivity of the immune response that you have. And then so how do we bridge that with these other two systems so that we can maximize potential for someone? There's this really interesting thing that happens when you think about healing in the brain or learning in the brain. It takes three parts. Number one, you have to have oxygen, right? All full stop. You have to have oxygen in order to stimulate the brain. You've also got to have glucose, because that's where we generate the energy from to be able to make ATP, to be able to use our brain. But then the third part, the part that always gets left out, but is the most important part, is that it has to be stimulated. It has to be stimulated within a threshold that it can tolerate to grow. And this part's really interesting because it turns out you can add glucose and you can add oxygen into the system, but if you don't stimulate the actual neurons, nothing changes. So the stimulation is actually the thing that you need the most to be able to solve for it. And unfortunately, it's the thing that gets left out the most. And the good news is you can measure in the brain how different areas work, how the pathways work, how they work together. You can measure how well you're able to get blood flow into the brain, how well that whole system works. And for many people, there's an unlock there. There's a way to use that as a catalyst to actually start to stimulate the brain in a way that allows it to be able to improve functionality in the immune system so that we can get a little bit of a boost relative to some of these other things. We can make that conventional medicine or functional medicine work in your favor better.